Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm so excited to just have a talk about the Capturing Christianity conference. I'm here with John Dunphy, who has a YouTube channel, Wolves Do Apologetics, and Maverick Christian, who also has a... Hi, so glad you guys are here. And they both have YouTube channels, and I'm going to put those the links to their channels up. And really, if you were at the Capturing Christianity conference or if you watched the debate, you are welcome to join this stream and talk about your experience. I'm putting the stream link in the chat. So please do come, and I'll just let you guys share your opening thoughts while I'm putting your channel links in the description. So who wants to share?
That was pretty good. I like the photography that came afterward. That was pretty good.
That was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, they should. Whoever did that should be paid like lots of money, just giant pots of money.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, Maverick Christian was there at the conference taking great pictures. And you know what? You got a picture of me with Cy Gart, and I was so happy about that because he was one of my highlights at the conference. So for those who are not really familiar with, the Capturing Christianity YouTube channel, please check it out. It's a great apologetics channel. And so last weekend, they put on a conference just exploring the topic, does God exist? And so it was kind of like being transported into a magical world of people who love to talk about deep topics and faith and philosophy. And I just loved it so much. Like, it was such an amazing experience that I kind of wasn't ready for it to end. And I've just been kind of like looking for ways to engage about it. So I just felt like doing this and just talking about our experiences. So, John, do you want to share some of like the highlights for you?
Yeah, meeting Josh Rasmussen, I didn't expect him to be like 6'6" or whatever he was, because me, Invoking Theism, and Kyle Allender were at the DoubleTree waiting. We got early access because of Dr. Josh, but I see him towering out. I was like, oh, this dude is tall. I didn't realize that. So that was definitely a highlight. Besides, meeting a bunch of cool people I've known for a while but haven't met. So the whole community aspect was my favorite part.
Yeah, the old cliche where I thought you'd be taller. Complete opposite with Joshua Rasmussen with me.
Yeah. I also, like you, I was really surprised how tall he was, and he looked quite a bit different than he does on the videos.
Yes.
But what did you guys think about his talks?
I liked him. His talk, I think, on the Legos, even though he shamefully used a Duplo instead of a Lego for his illustration,
Yeah,
I thought was my favorite part of the breakout sessions.
yes. That was a great talk for those who are interested in philosophy, which, you know what, I went to that talk and I have to say, like, it got a little bit over my head. And Josh Rasmussen's other talk after that got even more over my head. And I was like, oh, I don't know about this, but you know what? My son was with me and he absolutely loved Dr. Rasmussen's talks. And I think it kind of inspired him toward philosophy a bit. I think he's actually like considering studying philosophy now. So I was really happy that, his talks inspired my son, even though they were like kind of over my head.
I loved his ontological argument talk.
Tell us what you loved about that.
Well, so something that kept coming up in my conversations over and over again was this idea of simplicity and theoretical virtues. And we've all heard of Occam's razor, but I recently learned something new called Occam's laser. and that's your fundamental principle is you should not multiply beyond necessity before you even do any investigation, philosophical thought, or inquiry. And the idea of perfect being theism is actually simple, especially with God's ontology, meaning God is a mind. And with that, that's one of the best, most simplest starting points. Because if you posit matter or this form of naturalism, you get all this stuff and you're like, well, is this really a good place to start to explain all this stuff by starting with all this stuff? You know, that seems to violate Occam's razor. But if we start with perfect being theism as a theoretical virtue or this framework, it sounds a little precept-like, but when we look at it from worldview perspective, it's more of an inductive presuppositionalism from my mindset. Perfect being theism implies God has no arbitrary limits, and any starting point always has arbitrary limits. So to explain everything that has arbitrary limits with something that has arbitrary limits is going to therefore include just this infinite regress into the past. But if you start with perfect being theism, that God is perfect and has all perfections, that would make God necessary, and hence the simplest of explanations and fundamental explanations. So not just Occam's razor, but Occam's laser, if that makes sense.
Well, it doesn't make sense to me, but I want to hear from one of these guys that's studying philosophy. So hi, Danny.
What's up? What's going on? I think we're all studying philosophy, all four of us, right?
I'm being dragged into it.
Kicking and screaming, huh?
Yeah. So what do you guys like? What's your response to what John just said?
I just got here, so maybe this is a question for Maverick.
Oh no. So I was really tired when he did that ontological argument. I think I caught part of it. I was like, I need some sleep. I didn't get enough sleep last night, the night before or something like that. So I got some of it, but it was something like an impossibility entails everything. I think that was part of it. Some sort of principal explosion. Remembering that right, John?
Yeah, well, that sounds like the usual ontological arguments that if it's possible that God exists and God exists in all possible worlds, something like that. I think he was going deeper than that with perfect being theism, or I could be mixing up what I've read or heard of him before from my interviews and other interviews. So I may be mixing the two.
I do like how he gave some counterexamples to certain objections to the cosmological argument. Or not to the ontological argument. For example, no negative existential entails a positive existential. So one negative existential, one counterexample he gave to that was there are no truths. So that negative existential entails that there are no truths is true.
Yes.
And so, but there are no truths entails there is a truth which is a contradiction.
Very much.
So that was a pretty clever counterexample to that sort of objection.
Do you think that's a clever counterexample, Danny?
I mean, it's a good way to word the kind of self-refutation. There are no absolutes. There's no truth. There's no objective facts, right? These are all kind of like the lines of a person that just started out in philosophy or debate. And I guess that kind of phrasing that MC just gave, is to kind of cover the problem with those sort of statements, right? I'm sure that's what MC was trying to say too.
Is this Danny who debated Stallman Smith Jr.?
Yes, it is. Okay.
You look very different than that debate.
Yeah, I haven't taken a shower in days, but I'm just kidding. Maybe a couple of days. It's what the Hurricane Ida affected me, and so I'm using that as an excuse not to take a shower.
Were you at the conference?
No.
Oh, okay.
So there might be a question why I'm here, but I'm a big fan of Rebecca. So.
And you know what? Danny is like my philosophy tutor. So when I don't understand something, he explains it. So I'm glad he's here, and he would have been there he would have liked to have been there.
Had I
So-
known that she was going to be there, I would have been there.
Counterfactual truths. Exactly.
Yes, absolutely.
So, okay, guys, what did you think about the debate?
My prediction about who would win was dead on.
I watched
Did
actually
they
a little bit
declare
of
a
it.
winner? Was there a winner?
Well, I did. And my prediction was right, 100%.
Trent Horn?
Nope.
Really?
Affirmative. I'll give you another guess.
Well, there's only one remaining, but explain to me.
Nope,
what-
it's not that guy either.
Horn Trent?
No.
Okay.
Now this is getting weird.
My prediction who would win is the audience. Because, it was such a great debate.
Cool. What did you like about it?
Well, both of them brought their A game. They both did a very good job presenting their position. And I think, if I remember right, one of the reasons why it went so well, and somebody correct me if I'm mistaken, was that they kind of created their statements in advance. Was that right?
Okay.
That is
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, so that's why the debate was of such unusually high quality. Because if you're trying to think off the cuff, as opposed to like you're like spending hours trying to craft like the perfect response, if you do that, that's why a lot of times written debates tend to be of higher quality than just spontaneous spoken debates, because you really have to work to think on your feet and a lot of the other classic debating techniques. It also explained why, because I was doing a bit of photography, and it was kind of hard getting good shots because a lot of them were like, and look, da 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 da. I was like, come on, look up. I can't just take a picture of you looking at your notes. That made it a little bit trickier then, but occasionally I was able to get some photographs where they actually looked at the audience.
Cool.
You got a very awkward photo of me, like half my head and half my shoulder facing this way, so it looked like one of those prison shots. So I gotta thank you for that one.
Excellent. Happy to be of service.
I think that the fact that they corresponded about the debate prior to the debate makes it such that the audience can get a lot of information. But I do like the element of blood sports and the Coliseum feel. So, I started watching and I'm like, this is too edifying. But no, I'm somewhat joking. But yeah, it was those sorts of debates are pretty edifying. And I didn't get to the point where, was there a point where they started going back and forth in a kind of conversational setting?
Yeah.
I missed that part. How was that part?
It was good. Those are the only parts I like about formal debates. I don't like formal debates. I used to. I think they set up the mind for biased, and I think I think there's so much pressure on yourself that you may not be able to think clearly, and I don't think it's a good environment for it has its places, but it's like an MMA match versus a karate sparring match is the analogy I always use. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, the back and forth, I think, has the potential for a lot of good progress. You get a little more progress potentially with the back and forth. I kind of found that because I was in a debate recently on the evolutionary argument against naturalism
With Fodor, right?
with Fodor, yeah. And with a back and forth, we could make a lot more progress than we otherwise would have. I was in a similar situation on Capturing Christianity channel with Jeffrey J. Lauder, the co-founder of Internet Infidels. And with a back and forth, we would have made a lot more progress than we otherwise would have, as opposed to going like, I say something, that person says something. Whereas when that person says something, I might completely misunderstand the argument. Whereas with conversation, I can correct, no, that's not what I mean. I mean by this. Stuff like that can really advance conversation.
I also really do appreciate good rhetoric. I'm all for getting a good argument out there and supporting your claim, but the flashiness around it, like flashy rhetoric, is very entertaining for me. How quick one of the debaters thinks on their feet is just kind of, sometimes it's like watching a performance, right? Like where you're watching some kind of violinist, let's say, how well they play the instrument. That's how I kind of see debates as well with respect to the rhetoric.
Okay, so I have one of the points that I loved that Trent Horn made in the debate. Okay, I made a little clip of it because I want to know if you guys think this is a good argument or not. Because I heard this and I was like, yes, that's exactly it. Like that's exactly how I think about this. And then do you guys remember how there was like a guy who got up to like ask questions at the end of one of the talks, and he was like, I lost my faith. And, you know, like he was like a guy who had been a Christian and lost his faith, and he was asking a question. Anyway, the point is, I ended up meeting that guy after the debate. I saw him in the hallway and I was like, what did you think? And he was like, well, I hated the point that Trent Horn made about this. And I was like, I love that point. So I want to know if you guys, how you feel about this thing that he said. So I'm going to try to share this, but I don't know. I don't normally do this. So I don't know if it's going to
be sure to click the little box that says share audio.
Oh, really? Okay.
If there is audio, then you need to worry about that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're presenting a slide.
No, it's a yeah. Okay, wait, let me see.
If the past is finite.
Okay, can you guys hear it? Do you hear it?
Yeah, I heard it.
Okay, let me restart. Okay.
Moreover, if the past is finite, the universe would have begun to exist from a state of nothing. However, many atheists say they'd believe in God if they saw something like an amputated limb healed through prayer, or a limb from nothing. This means they would pick a divine explanation for a limb from nothing rather than no explanation at all. But if our universe came into being from nothing just as inexplicably as a healed, amputated limb, then atheists should be consistent and conclude the universe has a divine cause as well.
So, what do you guys think about that?
Short, I can think of like some responses to that, but short answer, I thought that was kind of a good point. I remember at least one other philosopher made the point where it's not something where the idea that things just happen for no reason isn't an explanation we would ordinarily accept. Like, even if it's like a simpler explanation, it's a simpler Occam's razor. Well, it just happened with no explanation at all. Well, it's simpler, but it's not very plausible. And if like a police officer finds a suspiciously large amount of money in my trunk, I wouldn't say, well, it just happened. It just appeared for no reason whatsoever. You know, nobody would believe that. So I do think we have this sort of natural skepticism for, you know, no explanation, for there being no explanation at all for some phenomenon or some event. And yeah, I mean, if I were an atheist, just another way to think about it is imagine the shoe were on the other foot. Suppose that the atheist had an explanation for why the universe existed, and the theist had no explanation whatsoever. I think we would ordinarily think of, like, if the atheist, like, okay, I have an explanation for like why the universe exists. It's the only plausible explanation I can think of, and you don't have any really good strong evidence against it. We think the atheist would say, okay, yeah, this is some rational support in favor of atheism, that we can explain something where there would be no such explanation for like why there's something rather than nothing, or why the universe exists. I mean, that is, after all, one of the purposes of science, is look for explanations for things, to kind of like stop at the universe and just say there's no explanation. It seems a little bit ad hoc.
What do you guys think? Hi, Gordon.
Hi. For those of you who are joining us, do you mind catching me up on what's been talked about?
Talking about amputees.
We're talking about right now. We're talking about a point in the debate that I loved, and I just want to I want to talk about why I loved it, and I want to hear like if other people think it's a good point or if it's not a good point.
Oh, okay.
So who wants? John, you want to say something?
Yeah, just when it comes to for their obsession with amputees, you know, I'm the type who looks at people's struggles and see, what do they actually have to say? And I reviewed a video on my channel that was actually in response to Cameron's video on amputees. And the woman herself, who is an amputee, isn't as concerned about it. She still has she's still going through a journey with God. She described it as, but like she describes herself as getting used to it, and she's more active than people, and she has a drive for some reason. I find it interesting that many amputees have drives. There's a guy I follow on TikTok. He has no legs, but like he's fit from the top up, all his torso, and he has a sense of humor with his condition. I'm like, why are these people like this and they have these conditions? If I lost my arms, if I lost my legs, I'd go insane. And they seem to have no amputee in their mind, which is a great miracle for some. And I think that is something that is overlooked and not even taken seriously, because I point this out to atheists who ask these questions and they seem very rude. They're like, oh, well, they're just doing that for their emotional stability. I'm like, wow, that's very arrogant and stupid. I'm not saying arrogant as in, just emotional, but it's like you're missing a point, perhaps, in their own experience of what they deal with. And yet many amputees do believe in God. I grew up, I remember in assembly when I was in middle school, of this dude who had no arms or legs. He was funny, confident, could play drums, and was a motivational speaker, and like made jokes about his condition on stage to like 500 kids. And it's just amazing to me what is going through their mind. What have they thought of? What have they lived? What have they experienced? Perhaps God speaks closer to people in those conditions. Perhaps they can see God closer because, the Beatitudes, blessed are those who mourn, for they will see God. Perhaps there's something about that they have, and yet these people obsessively asking this question, because a logical point Trent Horde makes is, oh, geez, the universe seems to come about in such a way that either the naturalist is going to say it's a brute fact or it just happened that way, which is ultimately a brute fact. And that's a more of a miracle than one's arm growing back, which they will just say a spontaneous remission, even if, well, you can give a couple cases, but even if it is spontaneous remission, that's all they're going to say, and they're going to say that's more likely. So really, that's not what they're looking for when it comes to their own doubts, in my opinion. So I think it's a good logical point, but when it comes to those issues, I like to, see what the people who struggle with themselves experience and what they think about it. And there's a good line from this woman's video I reviewed. I'm not a Calvinist, so I don't necessarily think everything happens for a reason. I think there's reason in everything that happens, because I don't believe God caused Joseph's brothers to enslave their brother Joseph. Rather, I think he took that good thing and brought out the most reason he could through that horrendous evil that Joseph went through for the saving of many. I view that as the same with amputees.
Well, I think we need exactly 2 more people so we can have a Brady Bunch thing going on.
Yeah, exactly. Danny, what do you think about the point that he made?
Well, I think it is something that William Lane Craig said in the last debate that he had with, I think, I only remember his first name, Scott. Can someone help me with the last name?
Scott Clifton?
Yes, Scott Clifton. I am not going to try to even paraphrase what he said, but what he had me thinking about is that I would not bet on atheism simply because there's a possibility that the universe began with no prior cause. Okay, so I think that this is related to Trent's point that just pointing out the possibility, or even weighing probabilities about the universe beginning without a cause, how plausible that option is. Like I just couldn't find myself into being an atheist just because of that possibility, because it is kind of violates a lot of the intuitions that we have about, I guess, how the world works. So to sort of push back on what he's saying at the same time, one of the most nebulous questions, or one of the most difficult questions for me, is at what point is it are we committed to thinking that there is an intentional, more specifically a divine intentional explanation? If the tip of my finger was cut and it regrew, am I rational in thinking that there was a divine explanation? What about a finger? What about a hand? What about the arm? It's just it's a gradaential thing at some point, right? It is true that if I scrape my skin, it regrows, right? So if I scrape a little bit further, and then at what point am I going to be rational in thinking that God exists? I don't have an answer to that, but it does seem like I would be caused to believe if I saw an individual like John was mentioning, no limbs, just regrow right before my eyes. I wouldn't have an option. I would almost be coerced into believing that this has an intentional explanation outside of human minds, and I'm just constituted that way. So to heck with justification, right? In that case, I'd just find myself believing.
That's a good point. Danny, I'm glad you're down there.
Your high five. I don't know if we could do the high five, but there you go.
Gordon, what did you think about that point? Do you have anything to add to it?
Only that I'm wondering where this sort of point comes from, because when I read the Bible, I don't see God restoring amputees per se. I know that God heals, God can bring people back from the dead. He heals sicknesses, but I think that this point about amputees in particular is purely rhetorical. It's not at all something that I would predict on theism even. And so for that reason, I don't really pay much attention to it. And I think it's just in that category of sorts of objections or claims or whatever you want to call them, just in terms of, oh, well, if God has the power to do insert the blank and insert the blank doesn't happen, therefore God's not all powerful. And insert the blank can be anything. It's like, write Jesus loves you on the moon or something like that. So I think this point about amputees in particular, it's a red herring ultimately. And that's just where I stand on it.
Okay, well, let me share what I love about that point. And I want to say hi to Rob and Otangelo. Glad you guys are here. We are sharing, I don't know if you saw the little clip I played, but
Yeah, I did.
You did? Do you have something you want to say about it?
All I can say is the only time you have a depiction of Jesus, or in this case God, doing some form of amputee growth is in the Gnostic scriptures. You don't find it in the Bible or anywhere else. I think it's in the Gospel of Thomas. Apparently, Joseph, there's this piece of wood that's a bit too short. It's like, I need a longer piece of wood. So Jesus comes and like grows the wood out to fit it perfectly in that slot. It's ironic that the such an example happens to be in a in a non-canonical piece of literature. But on a more serious note, with respect to Big Bang and the causal effect, like the prime mover, and that is a big question philosophically. From an astrophysics context, we can only go back to 10 to the minus 43 seconds after the Big Bang, after t equals 0, and anything before that, all the equations break down, energies are too high, and so therefore
this is why contingency arguments are the way to go for anything first cause or explanation wise.
Sure, but also let me just say this, that because the equations break down, and we're not even at t equals 0, right? We're very close, but we're not at it. This is why then people like Lawrence Krauss are very comfortable in saying he sort of like hides behind the curtain, so to speak, of the cosmological model he proposes. It's more likely. So the statistic, the thermodynamic statistic for an amputee leg to grow back just randomly is is less probable than, how do I put this? For the universe to come into being just randomly, out of nothing, it doesn't require God, because of the way things break down at t equals 0. Literally anything is possible, according to Krauss, in that sense. So in other words, to us it's more fantastic that the universe comes into being. We would expect an amputee's leg to grow. It would be more likely for an amputee's leg to grow, kind of like what Danny was getting at, than the way the universe comes to being. But then Krauss sees it the other way. He's like, when the system's already running, the system is under a uniformitarian nature of laws of nature, and an amputee leg growing back is very unusual. But it's not unusual if you're talking about t equals 0 and back with respect to the origin of the universe, because when you're at that position, things are so weird and paradoxical in itself. Again, anything goes.
I mean, matter doesn't exist yet, though, right? Because like carbon and all the basic blocks of life, you need that past the equations you're talking about.
Sure. Yeah. I mean that comes much later on. That's true. Nuclear synthesis of exploding stars and yeah.
What do you want to say about it, Otangelo?
Yeah, I think if we would see someone having its list again, it would simply be accommodated. Okay.
Otangelo, yeah, you're breaking up.
Is it better? Is it better now?
Yeah.
Probably because of the
Yeah.
time. Okay, so
Go ahead.
if we would see someone having its limbs grown, then this would be, if there would be an atheist seeing this, simply be accommodated in an atheist framework. It wouldn't promote that that person would become a believer because of that. I mean, we see much bigger miracles, like DNA being repaired, many repair mechanisms in the cell, which when something is broken, it is being repaired. I mean, these are things which should really put us in awe. And also an atheist should think about it. And I called in recently an atheist show and brought up that argument. And that's typical Otangelo argument and things like that. But if you really think about it, these are tremendous miracles. And how do you explain that? Do molecules have foresight that they should repair themselves if something goes havoc? I mean, hey, that's just irrational to believe that will be possible. So, and we see, like, for example, there is a guy which is blind and he can use echolocation. And how do you explain that? I mean, this is really fantastic. And people,
and that's the point sorry. That's the point I'm trying to make, that I love about Trent Horn's point. And it has really, I mean, I'm glad he picked the amputee example, because that's the one the atheists pick on so much, and I'm tired of it. And I'll just say a bit about that. I believe God heals amputees. Maybe I haven't seen that yet, but I don't see why he couldn't. And I have personally seen a lot of miracles, but the reason that I liked Trent Horn's point is because no miracle that I've seen, no healing miracle has contributed to my faith in the slightest. Because the thing that like makes me know God is real is the ordinary stuff that I see around me that's so awe-inspiring. Like Otangelo just said, I mean, you could say DNA, but even if you don't know what DNA is, the fact that we exist, the fact of all these like magnificent things that we see around us, like if that doesn't bring you to believe in God's existence, I don't think you would believe if you saw an amputee healed. And like, so why not? Like, I don't understand why, like, you know, the existence of matter itself, that's why his point is so good. It's because, like, you know, matter itself existing is just as much of, you know, this supernatural event as an amputee being healed.
Can I add something here quick? I called in earlier today at Dave Warlock's show, which he started, and then my call interrupted. But as soon as it interrupted, he said, well, I don't care about what Ontangelo is exposing about origins, how do we better explain existence. I want to know what God is doing or can do in our lives. And I don't see God acting in my life, at least. And when I hear that, then I thought, this is the same question which I made when I was 18, a young convert. And I asked myself, well, what can God do for me? Why should I believe? And then a brother came to me and said, well, Christ did everything for you. He died on the cross for your sins. He made you live. He gives you eternal life. Now the question that you should ask yourself is, what can you do for God? And I mean, I think sometimes atheists, they really think that God is more hindering them to do what they want. And that's why they want to get rid of him, rather than thinking that God is basically everything. That's why we exist. So that's why we should actually seek for him, because he is God and he made us to have a relationship with him.
Well, I think it depends on the atheist. I mean, some atheists would convince of, if I pray in Jesus' name that a limb would grow, they would be convinced. But then on the other hand, there are also some atheists.
Would they become a Christian like lifestyle, or would they just be cool, or would they be like, oh, that was cool, and then go on about their day like, oh, this limb grew back. Okay, where do I go from here? Because there's really no context like at all.
Yeah, Jerome,
well, I think like I said, it depends on the atheist. I mean, some atheists would. I mean, remember there have been some atheists who've converted to Christianity ostensibly because of the evidence. So it has happened before. But on the other hand, there are also some atheists who are more willing to believe that there's nothing really wrong with torturing an infant just for fun, and they are willing to believe that atheism is false. There are, fanatics, irrational fanatics on atheists, just like there are irrational fanatics on the religious people.
Yeah, I'd call those the people who are adamant against apologetics and loving the Lord your God with all your mind. No, none of those here, thankfully. It just goes to my point, though, that these amputees, a lot of them are Christians or have a strong drive. Like they keep moving forward and compete in Olympic sports and all this. Like in the atheist mind, it's probably nonsense or craziness to them. And it's like, why do they have that drive? And you got to think maybe they see something in reality because of that, that one disability, and they can focus on the mental, what God is truly working on the most in our lives, which I think there's much, there's a clear mental health issues in this country for various reasons, I argue. Maybe people miss God in those issues that they don't resolve. That's my opinion, at least.
Maybe, a guy, his name is Nick Vucic. He has no arms and no legs. And he makes tremendous things for the Lord. He travels all around the world and gives tremendous testimonies about what God did in his life. He has a blessed family, a wonderful wife, and he glorifies God in his condition.
That's because he can't handle the hardships of life. I mean, the atheists know this man's psychology very well. I mean, clearly. That's sarcasm, by the way. So I'm not actually saying that.
Yeah, and if anybody knows Bethany Hamilton, her arm got bit off by a shark, but she could still outperform. I saw her on The Amazing Race beating very fit men in all kinds of activities. So is she is and she's still an amazing surfer and everything. She has shined brighter because of that injury. But I want to put this comment that Jerome makes and I want to clarify. He said, I seriously don't understand how seeing a live miracle would be less strong evidence for God than normal things that we see every day. Well, I guess the point I'm trying to make, Jerome, is that maybe the problem is that the ordinary things have become too ordinary. You've lost your awe. There's actually nothing very ordinary about our existence at all. So for me, it's just as awe-inspiring and like leads me to God just as much to just see my hand. And or any human being, to have a conversation with a human being, or to look at a galaxy, or to look at any of the amazing things, like these things that we're calling ordinary are quite awe-inspiring. And so, like, for me, I don't know, like, even if I never saw a single miracle, it wouldn't affect my faith at all. Like, because like, it's just the things that I see around me just confirm to me who God is and of his existence.
Conversely, though, very briefly, conversely, there are non-theists that will see anything from a chemical reaction to the way their hand works. Like, I think even Richard Dawkins, when he was sick, I think he had a stroke. He was relearning how to use his hand, and there was a whole thing that he had typed up about how intricate his hand was. Like, he could, I don't know how to describe it myself, but how it could twirl and do all this. You could show both aspects of your hand. Just turning a doorknob is very difficult, and we take that for granted. It was difficult for him to turn the doorknob given his stroke, and we take that ability for granted. And he was just talking about how awesome this was, and then at the end, he was like, "Wow, how awesome is nature? How amazing are the processes of evolution? Yada yada yada." Right. So
and he's giving nature personal qualities. This is something you cannot escape. Any nature show, they ascribe to nature these like intentional qualities, these like actions that like an impersonal force such as nature cannot are not possible of. So
yeah, they anthropomorphize evolution and attribute intelligent qualities to evolution, superpowers of evolution, basically.
Well,
trying to
be fair,
God.
To be fair, they're just saying they're like brute facts that we just don't know about, but these are just cool coincidences anyway. Or coincidence wouldn't be a fair word for them. From what I understand from certain definitions of brute facts, because it's not anything argued from necessity, modal necessity. It's just like, yeah, we got this unexplained thing, but it best fits and is somehow best explained by what we're trying to explain with these brute facts in the first place. They want to say that it's just personification, sort of poetry of what is great of what we live in, but then they take for granted that we're live in reality. And I want to write an article called "The Miracle of Metaphysics," because a thought experiment I've been thinking about is I heard one dude say, what if we lived in the supernatural and you could move things with your mind like the Force, but like imagine if it's the reverse, where things can easily be moved with mind. Imagine something that sits still, gravity. Imagine gravity doesn't exist in the universe, and so it could make something stay in place. That'd be a miracle in that possible world. And I sort of want to argue that the fact that there's modality and metaphysics in the first place is sort of the greatest miracle, the philosopher's miracle, that we can even think about these things. And that's something I've been thinking about recently, at least.
Physics is very fascinating. I mean, nobody thinks about the fact that gravity is only attractive and not repulsive. It could be very well repulsive or not even exist whatsoever, and we wouldn't be here. Or even there is a hierarchy problem in physics, in cosmology, where physicists, they have no explanation. Why is gravity so much weaker than the other three fundamental forces? There is no reason why it is so. And if it wouldn't be so, then we would be here having this conversation.
You got to be careful, because that could fall into God of the gaps type reasoning. This is why it's best to argue from metaphysics and principles and worldviews and simplicity, I think. And then you make an even stronger case, I think, for Christianity and God.
Well, I think cosmic fine-tuning is a little bit of an exception to that, and you can kind of witness it by
those are metaphysics, though. I think not just isolations of.
That's actually not the gap argument. We start with the premise that the universe is finely tuned, and atoms and the fundamental forces and the laws of physics and all that stuff, and that demands an explanation. So there is no gap to be filled. There is a premise which demands an explanation.
Well, I think part of the problem with that argument, Ontangelo, is that presumably certain desires of God are not going to be further explained. They're going to be some either contingent truth about himself or some kind of thing that follows from his nature, some kind of necessary feature. Like, why is it that God decided to make Pluto the color that it is rather than purple? Okay, I think ultimately that's going to boil down to some kind of brute contingency. And for the atheist to demand a reason why he didn't make it a different color, is just kind of silly. Because at the end of it, that kind of decision just really doesn't. It's just kind of going to be a brute contingency about what God willed the actual world to be like.
Yeah, that would be trivial. Why are leaves green and not black or red or so? But I am talking about the fact that if the universe wouldn't be the way it is, we wouldn't be here.
Well, no, God could make different laws of physics such that we're here.
But Danny, these laws of and Angelo, sorry if I mispronounced that. There's another dude named Angelo there. No, I understand what you're saying now. I thought you were saying because they don't have an explanation, which they try to, therefore we should go with God. I thought that's what you were saying. But from what we understand and what physicists understand of our physics, they can do modal logic and they don't need a simple set. They can do the sets from the mathematics. This is what Luke Barnes talked about at the conference. And therefore, yes, God could make a universe with a different laws of physics, but he made this one. So let's see what we can reason from this and see if fine-tuning still is a thing. And you can do the test with the mathematics.
Yeah, he has done that. And they say if you change one knob, then you will automatically have to change 3 other knobs in order to have still a life-emitting universe. And if you change these 3 other knobs, then it's basically like a chain reaction. So they are not independent. If you change one, you need to change all others in order to still have a life-emitting universe.
Yeah, but I think my point is being missed. The point is that, sure, given certain laws of physics, there are certain conditions that are implausible to come into fruition such that we're able to exist. I can grant that. What I'm trying to say is that to ask why the laws of physics are the way that they are rather than the different laws of physics, well, that might be a brute fact, because the idea is that God could have created a myriad of scenarios. He could have created a Star Wars universe where the laws of physics are different and where there's like this force thing.
I don't think that's the argument, though.
That's not the argument. The thing is that based on naturalism, we should expect either a chaotic universe, which would be lifeless, or no universe whatsoever, because the expansion of the Big Bang also is finely tuned. And under theism, we would expect a universe which is tuned to permit life.
Well, what I'm trying to say, and I let me try to finish this, and I'll try to be brief, is that when you're asking what is the explanation for whatever we're seeing in this world, right? Just the idea there is that not everything is going to have an explanation under a naturalistic or atheistic worldview, right? There are going to be certain things about the way DNA works and all this stuff, and ultimately you're going to get these laws of physics, and they're going to be brute contingencies. And I'm saying that if you look at the theistic framework, it doesn't escape those sorts of things. The idea is that, okay, God explains why they're laws of physics, okay? But then we're going to push back the question, why is it that God chose those laws of physics rather than a different set of laws of physics? And eventually you can keep on asking the question till you get no explanation, you get some kind of necessary truth or brute contingency.
And one of the things that we also have to consider is the very important question of what was Rob eating a minute ago? Some type of sandwich? You there, Rob?
He hides so nobody can see what he's eating.
He's having too much fun with the sandwich.
I want to switch. I just want to get and make sure everybody gets to share their highlights from the conference. Gordon, will you share what was like for you one of the highlights of the conference?
I think it was just being there and in that auditorium with a group of like-minded people who nerd out about the same sorts of things. Because I try to have these conversations with friends or my wife, and they don't go so well. And so it was just fun to be able to connect with people in that way and to have conversations like we're having right now that I think are very important conversations. But for me, the I guess the takeaway piece is how can we communicate this to others? So, and in my role as a pastor, my whole thought process the whole time I was there was, okay, how can I get this presentation, this argument, this point that's being made, and convey that in a down to earth way that people can understand? And I think most people tend to comprehend cosmological arguments fairly well. They tend to comprehend contingency arguments fairly well. What I think could use a little bit more work in communicating is the fine-tuning piece. So, the Luke Barnes presentation was great in that sense, because he focused on this one little parameter, the cosmological constant, and he said, hey, if this is just tweaked plus or minus a certain value range, then everything goes out the window in terms of a life-permitting universe.
Yeah, no expansion, not the right expansion, no universe. Either
Yeah.
too fast and there would be no atoms and no life, or too and not fast enough, then it would recollapse and back to the singularity, and we wouldn't be here.
Yeah. So the crazy thing is, like, okay, well, that's a hard thing to wrap your head around, because you're like, wait, if this one little value is just off by a little bit, there's, the universe as we know it collapses or just fizzles out. And that's strange to think about, honestly. To me, it's a lot easier to think about a first cause or a necessary being or something like that. To wrap our heads around the necessary and sufficient conditions that were required for our particular universe to come about just boggles the mind. And to me, that in and of itself is kind of like an ontological argument almost, because it's almost, you could say, well, in order for this universe to be finely tuned, there'd have to be some sort of higher power, an intentional intelligence that is so far beyond our own, that can comprehend these numbers, that can comprehend the laws of physics and all the formulas and all that kind of stuff, and to put this universe into motion in just a precise way. So that was kind of my takeaway.
Cool.
The next
I think
Christianity. I'll go, Rebecca.
Just
I'll go to you.
Quick. I think it's fantastic that we have a pastor in our midst, which actually is waking up in regards of these issues, because I think they in a worship in the church, it edifies so much the church members when you can actually demonstrate all these things, because it glorifies God and it solidifies our faith. And not many pastors have yet, I think, woken up towards intelligent design and these things.
Well, thank you.
So here's a question from Pine Creek that's applicable here, which if God can make a universe tuned for life using any physical constants he chooses, then the finely tuned argument for God falls apart.
Yeah, he cannot do that.
No,
yeah,
it
he
doesn't
cannot
follow at
do
all.
that. He cannot do that. If you just change one fine-tuned constant, like what Reverend Gordon said, the cosmological constant, it is finely tuned in 1 to 10 to the 123rd power. We cannot even imagine this number, and if you just change a little bit, then no universe. So he cannot simply change them and still have a life-permitting universe. That's precisely the point of the fine-tuned argument.
Well, maybe to be snarky for a moment, is you could say, well, God's so powerful, he could just create a universe that's just molten lava. It's just this big lake of molten lava, and he can have us go surfing on a lava pit because God's so powerful, and he can just put a protective force field around us and so forth. So, I mean, if that's kind of like one way of tackling this problem of like, well, do the physical constants really matter if to an all-powerful being or not? And I think again this goes back to that whole thing that Danny was saying earlier about eventually we're going to we can keep asking these why questions, and we're going to get to a point where we're appealing to God's will, and we have to trust God's will at that point of just thinking about why this particular universe was created as opposed to a Star Trek universe or a Star Wars universe or the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Take your pick.
Yeah, I wanted to defend Pine Creek there in the sense that, like, what he means when we're talking about omnipotence, we're talking about logical possibility. Well, it's logically possible that God could bring life with all these various different constants. I think that's what he was trying to say, is that what omnipotence sort of entails is that to make any, coherent logical state of affairs come into fruition.
I agree, Danny. Good point down there. So if I were to be extra, sort of more charitable, we could also say that, even if the constants were by natural process could prohibit it, God could, by supernatural powers, create life in spite of what the constants say. Could God do that? Yeah, he could, I suppose. Does that mean the fine-tuning argument falls apart? Not really. I mean, it doesn't really follow at all. And perhaps this analogy will help. Suppose there's a meteor shower on the moon that says there is a designer. I supernaturally fine-tuned these parameters so that this message would appear. And suppose we do find certain physical constants and quantities that if any of them were outside an extremely narrow range, no meteor shower text would appear. We would probably take that as evidence for design. Now, someone could say, well, if God existed, he wouldn't need to finely tune constants. He could just supernaturally make that meteor shower text appear, couldn't he? Yeah, it could, but that does nothing to address the evidence for design. Or kind of the question is, what is the best explanation for the fact that we have the universe is fine-tuned for life? And design seems like a very straightforward explanation. The idea that God could supernaturally create life regardless of the parameters of the universe is true, but it doesn't really address the evidence.
And two, I think as soon as we get to just positing the design hypothesis itself, we're kind of already challenging naturalism's explanatory power here. And of course, theism has a breadth of resources to address fine-tuning. But as soon as we step away from the fact that the universe does not have a strictly material cause, and that the design cannot be attributed to an impersonal force or whatever, then there goes naturalism, right?
I think all those responses are good, but I think they're answering a faulty understanding of the fine-tuning argument, meaning the constants that we have of what we understand about the nature of the matter of this universe, what we can work with, not speculation of what God could create or what naturalism or what other multiverse universes exist out there. Perhaps there could be multiple fine-tuning arguments with different constants, with different laws of physics. What we're arguing is that with these laws of physics, we just so happen to be in the right area with the possible worlds that can come about through our laws of physics. So there could just be one atom. There could be multiple. There could be no matter at all. If the universe expanded too much, this is what we're working with. We're not working with some unknown speculative universe that God could create or whatnot. And I think that's a point that Doug may be missing with this question.
I'm going to take my leave.
It's a good point, John.
I have to go. I appreciate being on the panel. I do want to give one last thought, though, about design arguments in general,
Okay.
if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think the general problem with design arguments is that and I'm assuming that y'all respond to this when I'm gone. That's totally fine. But I wanted to give the thought anyways. I think the problem with design arguments is I don't think designers make any predictions that couldn't be predicted on a natural hypothesis. So the idea is that if there is a sequence of causal physical events, that's consistent with there being some designer, but it's also consistent with there being some prior set of natural states that explain that sequence. And that's the idea, that to appeal to physical phenomena to infer a designer, it's just going to be a problem of differentiating between, okay, that's expected on the designer hypothesis, but it's also expected on some unknown naturalistic hypothesis. And that's sort of my problem. But thanks for having me, Rebecca.
Thanks, Danny.
Okay, y'all have a good one.
Thoughts.
All right.
And John has to leave too. So, John, do you want to share any final highlights or anything from the conference?
Yeah, so I'll be having Ben Watkins on to discuss his imperfection argument, because during the whole thing, I was just thinking about his imperfection argument. I was using the BTW, taking notes, his cool notebook. And I came up with a couple syllogisms that Eric Hernandez and Braxton Hunter liked. So I presented the one, and I personally wasn't satisfied with the response because I don't think he was addressing what I was saying, but I think Ben was, answering on top of his head. So we're going to have him on. But, his line where he ended perfectly and he was like, "Now that's a possible world," or that's a perfect world. And it's like, well, we're in that world. So, you should become a theist. But no, in all seriousness, I think it was a great conference. I got to meet people I've been wanting to meet for a while. And I think these are some of the coolest people you meet, because they're willing to ask the deeper questions, even existential questions, not just epistemological, metaphysical questions. And most people aren't willing to do that. And I will always have appreciation for the people I meet. I wish they were around me more. So that is my highlight, I'll say.
Cool. Thanks for being here, and thanks for sharing. And for those who are watching, check out John's channel, Wolves Do Apologetics. And I put the link in the chat earlier. But if you look up Wolves Do Apologetics, I'm sure it's coming up #1 on YouTube.
Not really, but it's
no.
It's yeah, I don't blame people because it's simple. It's Wolves Do Apologetics, like the martial art Tanks Who Do.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. It's a common mistake.
My bad.
No, you're
Okay.
good. I just want to make that correction before I leave. But yeah, subscribe. Right. You won't miss anything.
Okay. And Gordon, do you have a channel right now? I know you have a podcast or something. Do you want to tell us about that?
You can just search for my name on YouTube, and you'll probably see some sermons and other random materials. It's just kind of like more of a dumping area. I don't really produce kind of YouTube content, so to speak. Okay. But I do have a podcast with my senior pastor called The Muddy Pulpit, and we take questions and get to them. And we wrapped up our first season a few months ago, and we're planning our season 2. But it's available everywhere. You can just have Alexa say, play the Muddy Pulpit podcast, and she'll do it. So
awesome. Thank you. Well, I would like to share another highlight of the conference for me. But if anybody needs to go, I want you to share your final thoughts. So do let me know. You can interrupt me if you need to. But so one of the highlights for me was kind of a surprising one. I loved listening to Dr. Cy Gart, and both of his presentations in the first, in the general session and then in the breakout session. I loved what he said. And now I'm almost done reading his book, The Work of His Hands. And for those who don't know Dr. Gart, he was a militant atheist for most of his life, and he was a scientist. He's a biochemist, and it was through his work in science that he discovered who God was. Like he discovered that there was a God. And so it was just, really, it's interesting to read his book and hear his process of how his, how his worldview was shaken, how he couldn't hold on to naturalism when he started to see the answers that science couldn't give, and that things were not as straightforward, as like presented by naturalism. And one of the things I loved about his talk, he talked about really how the complex processes that are involved with life, and with like translating and everything, the genetic code and all the processes involved in the cell. And it was just really just captivating to just understand some of those processes. And what I loved, the reason it surprised me that I loved his talk is because I don't believe in evolution. I don't accept evolution. But so I really wasn't sure that I would like his talk, because I know he is he's very much a believer in God, a believer in Jesus Christ, but he does embrace evolution. And so, but what I realized during his talk is that he's making the same types of arguments that scientists who don't believe in evolution make. And he's showing that, these are not the kind of processes, the things that happen in a cell. This is not something that could arise by chance. And so that's what I loved about his talk. And so, like, I know most of the Capturing Christianity folks are like evolution believing. So like I'm kind of like an outlier in this group with regard to that. But it really kind of grew my appreciation for theistic evolution, realizing that like the same types of arguments are presented, whether you believe in intelligent design or, creationism, or, whether you embrace like theistic evolution or creation evolution. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Did you see Seigart's talk?
I saw it. I had I had mixed feelings about it because the thing is with intelligent design theory is that even if the evidence is in favor of it, it's a terrible apologetics because you're still dealing with fringe science. It's not accepted by the mainstream scientific community. And you could say, well, that's because of the biologists they're biased. But we don't quite see the evidential reaction we might. So a very good contrast between this is contrasting the intelligent design theory, the supposed evidence for intelligent design theory for biological design, and contrast that with the fine-tuning argument. So we could theoretically have had physicists that, I don't think fine-tuning is real. But what do we see instead? We acknowledge that the cosmic fine-tuning is real by scientists. And that's, when you think about it, really serious evidence, because what are the alternatives? What kind of explanation do we see there? It's like, well, maybe there's like, a bazillion universes with varying constants and quantities, and maybe life permitting, maybe one of them is life permitting. That's like a really extreme hypothesis. Theoretically, something could have been done for biological life. Like we could say, like, undirected natural processes on Earth aren't reasonably capable of doing the job. It's like a tornado going through junkyard and assembly 747. It's unlikely with that in the absence of designer. But maybe there's a multiverse and the zillion universes, and maybe one of them would evolve life just by chance that way. We could theoretically have seen that with the evidence for biological design there, but we don't. And because we have that contrast, it makes me a little bit skeptical that the evidence for intelligent design theory is.
Well, I would like to answer to that. I think there is still a lot of ignorance in regards what actually happens inside of the cell. And I meet all the time atheists which have absolutely no clue, which try to dispute that there is information stored in DNA, or that there is a genetic code, or that proteins are molecular machines, or that the cell is in a literal sense a chemical factory. And there has a lot to be done from those points to actually bring that to the larger understanding of people, what is actual the marvels that we actually see in biochemistry. And once someone really understands it, then you'll just start to get in awe, and you cannot then be amazed by these things which you learn about. And I think that, at least for me, the teleological argument, both in biology, biochemistry, and also cosmology, fine-tuning, there are formidable arguments that point to God. If atheists don't accept it, even if they understand the science, it's not because the argument is not powerful, it's because they are close-minded.
So why are they not so close-minded with respect to the evidence of fine-tuning? I mean, because there's a really big difference there between the supposed evidence for design in biological life versus the evidence for design in cosmology. We see widespread consensus, even among non-theist physicists and astronomers and whatnot, for the evidence for design. Now, they may try to explain away that evidence, but they at least acknowledge that evidence is there. We do not see that with biology.
Well, I think evolution is a very, very complex topic, and you can very much easier snake in naturalism. But when it comes to the origin of life, where you don't have the mechanisms like natural selection, then the problem becomes much, much bigger. And then you have a much more powerful argument for design, because you cannot use the crutches of evolution and natural selection to explain the origin of life. And then they need to make much bigger leaps of arguments to justify their naturalistic narrative. And then you really make them think, even if they don't acknowledge it or publicly admit it, but at least privately it gives them things to think about.
Well, that doesn't quite answer my question, but I'll move on. Before I forget, because I wanted to respond to that, I can't remember his name, but he made it a sort of an objection against teleological arguments in general for design. That, well, you could have some have unknown naturalistic theory that could predict the same data. And for that, I'd say you theoretically could, but there have to be some sort of limits to that. Think again to the fine-tuned meteor shower scenario, where the meteor shower says, yes, there is a designer of the universe. I fine-tuned some parameters so this message would appear. And of course, could you come up with a naturalistic theory that could explain it? Sure, you could say those parameters, those fine-tuned parameters, they happen to by chance, or maybe they're metaphysically necessary, or maybe there's a multiverse. So there is a way to naturalistically explain it. But on the other hand, there's a difference between coming up with a possible explanation, coming up with a good or likely explanation. Clearly, even though you could come up with a non-design explanation for the fine-tuned meteor shower, it wouldn't be the simplest or most likely explanation.
Maverick Christian, now what Dr. Gart was talking about was the origin of life. So
that's what I was talking about too.
Yeah. So are you saying, though, because you're saying there's not the consensus that life could not have started by natural processes?
Well, there's not a consensus about the type of evidence that we would expect. So one type of evidence that would support intelligent design theory with respect to life is that we actually determined that undirected natural processes are not really reasonably capable of producing life from non-life from the primeval Earth. You would need something like directed panspermia, for example. That's the type of evidence that we could imagine scientists accepting. And yet we don't really have that. Even though directed panspermia was floated in the mid-20th century, it never really caught on. And more to the point, even if there were, suppose for some reason there's this weird disconnect where physicists can accept the evidence for design, but for some reason biologists can't. There's some sort of weird bias that even afflicts Christians, biologists, even most Christian biologists aren't necessarily intelligent design theorists with respect to the origin of life, like Joshua Swamidass, for example. It's still not a good practical apologetics because you're appealing to fringe science, not scientific mainstream. And because, most of us here aren't biologists, we're not qualified to assess the evidence. We kind of like go with the main, what the scientific consensus is with respect to raw scientific facts. It's
Well, the
not
consensus-
it wouldn't practically convince people because you would appealing to fringe science, as opposed with the cosmic fire tuning, where you're actually appealing to scientific evidence that is accepted by the mainstream.
Well, the consensus in regards of the origin of life is that there are not even plausible models which would even explain the origin of the basic building blocks of life. So science doesn't have whatsoever even a basic clue, and rather to come closer to explain how life started from non-life by natural means. The evidence and the advance of science demonstrates the size of the problem, which becomes bigger and bigger. And I think also James Tour has made a series of very good YouTube streams where he pointed out on a chemical level the huge problems, and why the lack of natural selection is a huge problem in regards of giving an explanation of the origin of life.
Well,
Guys,
on that note of, I asked Sias, like, hey, where do you stand? Are you Discovery Institute or BioLogos? And he was like, right in the middle. Because his
Okay.
presentation, it sounded a lot like some of the stuff that Stephen Meyer is putting
Yeah.
out with, like, the return of the God hypothesis. And it almost struck me as, he was leaning more kind of Discovery Institute kind of content with his presentation about
Yeah.
DNA and everything.
Yeah.
So that's what I thought was interesting about his position. He wasn't very open with where exactly he stood, and I think that was probably for the best.
It's
Hey
because
guys,
he-
I want to just take a minute. I want to welcome Apologetics Squared and give him an opportunity to talk here. So,
Oh, thank you. I'm not much of an expert in the biological arguments, but I generally seem to mirror Wade's kind of view. Like, whether or not we can make an argument, it might be counterproductive to try and make these kinds of arguments because, the scientific community doesn't have your back here, so it's going to be an uphill kind of battle. Whereas with like fine-tuning arguments, it's not going to be that much of an uphill battle because it is already the scientific consensus that we have these constants and that they have these parameters. So on this specific topic, I pretty much mirror Wade's view.
okay. Do you want to share your highlights from the conference?
Sure. My highlight was basically, one part I really enjoyed was I got to talk with Josh Rasmussen about he's developing like this new theory of like God's knowledge, where like it sounds weird when you first hear it, but like God doesn't have all thoughts. He's not thinking about all true things. He's only thinking about like a subset of all true things. And basically we just had a lot of interesting conversations about his theory and other stuff like Molinism and
That's one thing I wanted to talk about, guys, because one thing that surprised me is during the panelist Q&A, when somebody asked, like, what is your ideas about God's foreknowledge or whatever, like almost all the panelists said Molinism.
yes.
And now I only know what Molinism is because Danny told me, because I see when we're on the Bereans, whenever I see big words like Molinism, I just don't read it because I don't get into that. But then like Danny explained Molinism to me and I thought, ooh, that's an awful idea. And so it kind of surprised me that the panelists like all like Molinism. So where do you guys stand on that? And
Who's gave you this explanation where your immediate reaction was that's an awful idea?
Well, Danny, who is an atheist, but he I think he gave me an accurate explanation of it. So it's like God knew all the possibilities, and don't think that this is the way he explained it. I'm sure I'm not. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna like butcher it. I'm gonna give like a very rudimentary explanation, but like where it's like God knew all the possibilities of what people would choose, and then he like chose the best possible circumstance. And so like he knows what's going to happen. We still chose what's going to happen, but we're all kind of like acting it out now.
Yeah, sort of. That's my response. Sort of, yeah.
Okay, how am I misunderstanding it?
I don't know what it means. Like we're all kind of acting it out now. It's like kind of like, well, God just knows the future, but he knows every possible way the future would go as well. You could think of it this way: in any given circumstance where there's different like branching possible timelines, God knows how time would unfold from that circumstance if we ever got to that circumstance, and God uses this knowledge to order human affairs. That's another way of putting it.
Okay, so what do you guys think about that?
Oh, I'm a pretty hardcore Molinist myself.
What appeals to you about that explanation?
Well, I think that it has a lot of explanatory power. Like, what's weird is like if you have this kind of God is outside of time view, and you have libertarian free will, you actually can't really easily account for prophecy any better than an open theist can. And the reasons for that are really technical, but God being outside of time and like just being able to see the future doesn't give you a lot of ability to account for things like prophecy. So what you would need to do is tack on something extra from beyond God just being able to see the future, and giving him the ability to see like different possible futures, for lack of a better way of putting it right now. The real term is feasible worlds, but adding that extra power in God's omniscience allows you to have things like prophecy. But then if you go too far, like you might want to go all the way to divine determinism, but that gets rid of libertarian free will. So like Molinism is basically the one that gives God the most power over like how to predestine things without falling into like denying human freedom.
Yeah, the way I think about it is just to use like a chess game analogy in terms of, if God is the, let's say, is the player white, and then we are the black player. So there's things that God initiates, and there's things that we can do, and then God knows all of the possible iterations of the game that could be played. And no matter what choice we make, God has a move that he can make in response to that.
Yep.
And I think that, when you think about it that way, of just like God is like the ultimate chess grandmaster, it becomes a little bit easier to contextualize that in our everyday experience. It becomes easy to contextualize that Bible when there's prophecy. We don't really need to use technical language here. It's just now I think there's that other end of the spectrum, though, of theistic determinism, where God is in control of both the white and the black pieces, and we just have the illusion of a game being played. I don't really agree with that view. That's kind of very hardcore Calvinist, like super super Calvinism, whatever you want to call it. I believe God loves us and gives us freedom. And yeah, to me, it doesn't make the Bible doesn't make a whole lot of sense if God is just manipulating everything and everyone.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Maverick Christian, what do you say about that?
I'm a Molinist myself. I'm not convinced on these. Don't really have any hard and fast rules about the mechanics of how that works. I suspect God, to a large degree, has non-propositional knowledge, like how William Lane Craig described it, is how we finite humans we separate knowledge into like chunks called propositions and think about that. Whereas for God, it's more like a seamless whole, and that's sort of my view on God's omniscience.
Mm-hmm. Talking to Josh Rasmussen, I actually kind of drew more to that theory. Although I thought you could also just have both. Maybe God has like this seamless knowledge, and then on top of that, if he so desires, he could pile on top of it like these individual packaged thoughts about specific propositions.
Yeah, I kind of thought that too. I suspect that because one of the reasons why that theory came to mind is when Jesus came on the earth and he had a human nature, And so you'd imagine that you'd have like chopped up propositions in Jesus's brain when he was on the earth and being human.
And if he has that power, would the God, just in his divine nature, also have that power to give himself these kinds of thoughts that are chopped up into blocks? And I don't see why he would lack that power. So he could very well have both kinds of knowledge, in my mind.
I heard the first time Molinism with William Lane Craig, and it was about those which never hear the gospel. And then he came up with that theory that God would know if that person eventually would hear the gospel, if then that person would convert or not.
To me, that is an awful idea. Like that, I feel like that idea would cause us to be less loving of people, like people in different places and cultures than us. Like, oh, well, they would have heard the gospel. Like God, if they would have accepted the gospel, God would have put them in the place to hear the gospel. So the fact that they haven't, well, that's actually their fault. Like, it's like, it just kind of like makes a mess of like God loving people and like reaching out to the entire world. So I have a problem with that view that you expressed, that's William Lane Craig's view, Otangelo.
Yes, I hear that from him. I never thought about these concepts, but of course, I mean, there is a big gray zone where we don't know how will God judge those which never hear the gospel. How will he judge children which die? How will he judge all these people which never hear the gospel? So the Bible doesn't give us really much information about these issues, and of course, we would like to know.
My thinking is like William Lane Craig is like facing a specific objection. Like if somebody has this moral principle that if I were in other circumstances and in those circumstances I would have accepted the gospel, it is immoral for God to create me not in those circumstances. And like there's some intuitive appeal to that. You could just end up denying that. But if you wanted to keep that intuitive seeming principle, is there any way to keep it? And Molinism does give you a way to maintain that principle. If you don't believe that principle, then you don't need Molinism to solve this issue for you. But if like somebody you run into is like hardcore set on this principle, like, hey, if God could have saved me, then he should have. Like if there was some circumstances he could have put me in, then he has this moral obligation to put me in. Well, then you don't have to just be like throw your hands up and be like, sorry, dude, you can give some explanation. That's my way of viewing it.
Okay, so do you guys think there are other ideas about like aside from Molinism, isn't there another way, a better way to like reconcile this? I'm kind of an uncommitted open theist, meaning I don't really care that much, but I tend to think that like God may not know all of the future. He's the most powerful actor in the world, so he can determine certain things, which is why prophecy can be true, but that he's kind of experiencing things in the way that we do because, like that's how I see him acting in the Bible. He gives a lot of like, well, if you do this, then I'll do this, or, there's like, it seems as if God is acting in time along with us. So what do you guys think about that?
Oh yeah, most days
I
I will probably tell you I think God's foreknowledge is probabilistic. Don't tell anybody else that, but I kind of think that this just comes from my own study of this is more like a philosophical argument. It's motivated by science of just learning about quantum wave functions and that sort of stuff. The fundamental layers of reality operate probabilistically. And so I think if we want to say God is the most powerful being in this universe and has to, he can do anything within the bounds of physics, then that includes even his foreknowledge of that. It has to operate probabilistically. Now we do this ourselves, so there's a very high probability I know that tomorrow morning I'm going to brew myself a cup of coffee, right? And that's just based off of my own psychology, based off of my own personal preferences and my habits. But if God knows so much about me and knows everything that's going on, then his forecast is going to be a lot higher than mine when it comes to predicting behaviors, when it comes to predicting the future, even when it comes to making prophecy. So yeah, most days that's kind of my my answer. But
Oh wait, this is not. Wait a minute.
but apologetic squared. I think you're about to chime in.
Yeah, I was gonna say something. Where did I get cut off? My audio or my Wi-Fi just decided to be mean.
We didn't hear anything. So if you just want to,
I think that Molinism allows you to be really open. Like you could give a very kind of personal view of God while maintaining Molinism. So I'm happy with my Molinism. And it allows me to, it has lots of things that it could explain. Like I have a super complicated theodicy, well, complicated in some respects, and it relies on Molinism. So that's one of my motivations for being a Molinist. It allows you to have lots of tools.
Now, I want to understand that more, but there's some pretty good stuff going on in the chat
Yes.
here. Pine Creek put up, that I desire none should perish. 2 Peter chapter 3, yet I will create a universe where I know some will. And Matthew Simpson agrees here that we don't know the mind of God unless you read the scripture. He says he desires none of us to perish, but creates people knowing they will choose to perish. So what would you guys respond to that?
Yeah, so there are a couple of responses to this. One would be the obvious, of course, is that some people are universalists. They believe hell is more like a finite prison sentence. And I'm a hopeful universalist. I don't believe it, but I don't quite disbelieve it either. And
I assign a credence of 0.2 to universalism.
I don't know what that means, apologetics squared.
Okay.
It's like a level of confidence.
Okay, a good, is that a high level of confidence?
0.2 is 20%, so not that high.
Not that high, but it's not zero.
Okay, so universalist, hopeful universalist. Gordon, what's your thought about that?
we were joking, when we were out getting dinner and stuff like that, saying God will save everyone who he doesn't annihilate, which is just that's kind of an off-color joke. But I'm a hopeful universalist and annihilationist.
Okay, what about Otangelo and Rob? I don't know I think Otangelo's still with us. I'm not sure Rob is, but what do you guys, actually, I already know but go ahead and share your thoughts.
Yeah, I am not a universalist. I believe that hell is eternal, and especially the devil will never be forgiven. And nowhere does the Bible say that somewhere in the future he will be forgiven and then be redeemed or something like that. So I disagree with that view. And in regards of knowing the future, I think that God knows the future, and to think that in quantum mechanics things are not as in the big world, there is a clear delimitation, which is the Planck constant, and that doesn't mean that in the big world things are also not deterministic. I think that God knows the future.
There's another possible response besides universalism, though, and that's just pointing to the nature of the beast, because free will has to be some extent irrevocable if it's to be meaningful at all. Suppose God suppose God created me to have free will to choose between option A and option B, and option B is a bad option. Now, if he revoked my free will every time I was about to choose option B, so I only choose option A, well, then I never had free will to begin with. There was only one possible option for me. Now, apply this to the decisions we make for good and evil, and we could say that if we're to have free will, there have to be some possible worlds in which I freely choose evil and God doesn't stop me for free will to be meaningful at all. And so applying that consistently for salvation, we would also have to say, well, there are going to be there might well be some possible worlds in which not everybody is saved, not everybody achieves salvation. If you weren't a universalist, because if there weren't, then people never had free will to begin with. That's just sort of follows from the nature of the beast.
Yeah, and I mean, my view on this is that I think the Bible is clear that there will be, the wicked will be destroyed. So the wicked who want to stay wicked will be destroyed. I don't believe that they will be eternally tormented. I don't think the Bible teaches that. I don't think that when the Bible says hell, I think it's a bad translation, because what that word has become in our collective conscience is not what it is meant to be when expressed by Jesus. I think but I mean, I'm fine with universalism too. Like, I think people who are universalists, and there are some like biblical things that could point to universalism, like, where it says like all, there's a lot of references to all being saved. So like in Romans chapter 5. So like there's some, I think, decent arguments for universalism. And I tend to find that people who believe in universalism are like more loving toward people. But I mean, maybe that's just my observation. I mean, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say that, but at least they're considering the consequences of the other belief. But I don't really have a problem with the idea of people freely, like God doesn't want people to perish, but he has given them free will. He has given them the choice to become the sort of moral beings that they want to be, and to choose their destiny, whether it is destruction or entrance into his kingdom. And he's provided a way that the bar is so low to get into his kingdom, he's giving it away as a free gift, and anyone can enter. And so, like, I don't think we really have room to complain. Pine Creek is asking me, imagine everyone you loved was going to eternal conscious torment, would you want God to create these loved ones or not create these loved ones? Well, I don't know if I like that question, because I think eternal conscious torment is a bad idea. And so I don't think that God is going to or would ever want to torture people forever. So like that doesn't really match up with the God that I know, the God of love. And so but I suppose that's the weird thing. I can't really entertain a hypothetical that like messes up the character of God. So, but I know there's a lot of people who do believe in eternal conscious torment. And so I don't like really care to like fight about that. But if anybody else wants to respond to Pine Creek's hypothetical,
Rebecca, I would like to respond to you. I actually also think I cannot understand why torment for our sins should be eternal. And I mean, I would think it would be more logical that each one which rejects Christ and would pay accordingly to the sins performed here on earth, and eventually after a certain amount of punishment then we would be annihilated. I think that would be perfectly logical. Now the Bible, in my understanding, doesn't say that. It says aeon to aeon, which means literally eternal. So there are open questions, and I mean, I confess my limited understanding why that is so.
Well, I'll play devil's advocate since I'm in red here.
Very evil.
Yeah.
What's that? Wait, sorry.
I said I'll play devil's advocate since I'm in red here.
Okay, go for it.
But what idea is that It might be true that in hell you only pay for a finite amount of sin, but while in hell you keep sinning, so you just add more years to your sentence, and so it just kind of goes on forever for that reason.
Well, I will also say in response to that, Otangelo, that eternal is, death is an eternal consequence, meaning you're never coming back from it. The Bible says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life. Perish, die, be destroyed. These are the words that the Bible uses again and again to talk about the destiny of those who do not enter God's kingdom. So if you perish, you are gone forever. That's an eternal consequence. That's so eternal in duration, not in like an ongoing torture, if that makes any sense.
Well, the Bible says a second death. So why is there a second death if the first death would be final? So
because there's a resurrection. There's a resurrection of all who were living, all who have once lived upon the earth are going to be raised and judged, and there's a second death for those who are not entering God's kingdom.
Okay.
But I have 3 videos on that topic, Otangelo. I've dedicated quite a bit of time to looking into this, and there's other people too. The Rethinking Hell people. But does anybody want to share any final thoughts on that, and then we can talk about another topic from the conference?
No, thanks.
Okay. All right. Anybody want to say anything about one of the areas of the conference, like one of the discussions in the conference that we haven't talked about yet? Like, I'd like to hear.
We need to talk about Josh's ontological argument.
I was going to bring that up. Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Go for it, guys. This is the part that I'm not going to be able to contribute much to because I really didn't understand most of what he said, but I still loved it.
Yeah, so it struck me. I think he was being very gracious by stating his intent of he's just trying to figure out a way to get to the existence of God just by conceptual analysis alone. And he was upfront about the difficulty of that project. And he was upfront with multiple objections before he actually got into the argument itself, which I appreciated. Now, as for the technical points, that I will probably pass over to Maverick or Apologetics Squared, because those guys know what they're talking about.
Well, thanks. So, should we lay out the argument or what?
Yeah,
go for it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you download his PowerPoint at all, or?
Yeah, I did. But
Yeah.
even after the presentation, I was immediately thinking how could I make a video on this, right? Because I wanted to make a video. So the idea is take any concept, the concept of a unicorn, and then we can think of everything that this concept entails. The concept of a unicorn entails the concept of having a horn, for example. And now, some concepts entail everything. For complicated technical reasons, the concept of a married bachelor entails everything. Any impossible concept will entail everything. And we could talk more about why that's true, but you'll just have to give that for me for now, and we keep going on. So what does that mean?
For those who are curious, look up the principle of explosion.
Yeah. So the concept of something impossible entails everything. Now, what about the concept of a perfect thing or the concept of perfection? What does that entail? And Josh said, well, we know just intuitively, just innately, we know that the concept of perfection does not entail anything negative. The concept of perfection only entails positive things. But that means that the concept of perfection isn't impossible, because if it was impossible, it would entail everything. So where do we get from there? Well, that means that perfection is possible. The concept of perfection is possible. And then you employ like S5 modal logic, or the possibly necessary equals necessary. And the concept of perfection has necessity in it. So was that too fast?
You're good.
Okay. So therefore, perfection necessarily exists, or the concept of perfection is necessarily instantiated. So that's the argument in a nutshell.
Yeah. I was thinking about like, this was a point of conflict that I had personally, because really the whole question is, well, how do you define perfection? And I asked Josh that on Facebook, and it's like, well, what do you mean? Because certainly we can think about, just hypothetically, what is the perfect shape? And many of us will have different answers to that. So then when we think about what is a perfect being, in what sense can we predict what other properties are entailed by perfection itself? So I'm putting on my devil's advocate hat, of course.
I think that's interesting, but we could ask the same question about like something we could agree exists, like the perfect political system. Like maybe like that seems like something that does exist. There is some like perfect kind of political structure. We just can't access it. We can know kind of what it would be like. We definitely know that it wouldn't be like oppressing all of its people and causing immense suffering. Although maybe the details we would like disagree about. And like we have lots of disagreement. People argue about politics a lot, so I've heard.
Yeah.
Although maybe you'll be the devil's advocate and say, well, how do we know that there's a perfect political system? But
I thought that was a point that Josh had in the presentation about running these parity arguments, like the perfect pizza or the perfect island or the perfect this. And, you know, the reason why all of those examples fail is because a perfect pizza, any way you slice it, has limitations, right? It can only feed so many people. It can, it only occupies so much space, that sort of stuff. So when we think about an actual concrete being, you know, something that exists that doesn't have any flaws whatsoever, doesn't have any limits whatsoever, any deficiencies, any weaknesses or dependencies, then we arrive at this thing that is perfectly the way it is. It's complete, it's whole. And when I think about that idea, I think of a presence that occupies all points of space and time, that is here with us, that knows everything, that you know, I think of something that very close to God in that sense.
Well, you're being a lousy devil's advocate. That sounds like you agree.
I know.
Okay, well, there was a question about this. I'm looking for it now because I've gone away from it.
No, I think the question that a devil's advocate would bring up is, what is it about perfection that is objective, perhaps? Like, can we come to some sort of agreement what perfection is?
Well,
all right, this is a question about Josh Rasmussen. It's not out on this topic exactly, but do you guys think he actually believes in the bodily resurrection of Jesus? I don't think he does.
Oh, that's weird.
Any idea why Pine Creek thinks this? I don't know. I didn't get that impression.
Me neither.
Me neither. Anyway, I could think of an objection to Rasmussen's ontological argument.
Okay.
Where he says absolute perfection does not entail negative property. So I'll play devil's advocate again. I have the right color for it. the fight back's like, no, I disagree with that because of so apologetics. Are you by entailment? Were you thinking of what I was thinking, like something akin to strict implication?
See, I'm not sure what how to define strict implication. I tried to find some articles on that, couldn't find anything.
Oh, okay.
But
it's very simple. P strictly implies B if and only if it is impossible. There's no possible world in which P is true and Q is false.
Oh, okay. Sorry, that's not what I was thinking of. Yes, I do know that. That's what I was thinking of. Yes, entailment via possible worlds. So that kind of entailment does have some counterintuitive conclusions. Like, if you're a theist, then 2 + 2 = 4 entails that God exists, and if you're an atheist, then 2 + 2 = 4 entails that God doesn't exist, even though there isn't like some sort of logical connection between 2 + 2 = 4 and there being a God or not, just because it's based off of possible worlds.
And the thing that came to mind, and maybe I'm missing something, is that an atheist who believes that a metaphysically necessary God would obviously exist in no possible worlds would say, well, it actually does entail because it vacuously entails everything.
Mm-hmm.
Because it doesn't exist in any possible world.
So I think what Josh would say is like, well, hold on. We just innately see that the things that a perfect being would entail is not negative things. And we found that entailment means this thing about possible worlds. Or maybe that's not what Josh would say, but that's what I'm going to say. I'm being the angel's advocate.
How would you guys answer this question? How can we grieve a perfectly complete God? Like, you know how it says, don't grieve the Holy Spirit?
Well, I think that's not too hard. Like, say somebody rapes and murders your family, and then, like, we could think of, like, possible emotional responses to that. And it's like, happiness. Ooh, that's not a great emotional response. Indifference. Getting better, but still pretty bad. Sadness. Oh, yeah, that seems like a better kind of emotional response. Okay, so what would be the perfect emotional response? And, grief seems like the kind of perfect emotional response. So a perfect being would be grieved by such a scenario.
Well put. You over there.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Cool. Well, what about this idea that was shared like by some people at the conference? And I guess they said this is part of classical theism. God has no emotions. Like, do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Which is a bit of a misnomer because, I mean, the early Christians weren't classical theists on that definition. But one view of so-called classical theism, which is really more like Thomism, is that God has the property of being impassible, that he doesn't actually have emotions, and that the stuff that we read in the Bible were just anthropomorphisms.
Okay.
Yeah, I think this debate it's divine simplicity, right? That's kind of
it's related to that, yeah.
Classical theism is like this basket which has a bunch of things in it, divine simplicity being one of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was something I felt was maybe to Trent Horn's disadvantage, because most of the audience I felt was not Catholic, and so he had a lot of that extra theological, I don't say baggage, but it was just different. He had a different theology than most of us.
No, I loved it. I was going to say that was one of the things I loved about the conference, is that they had Trent Horn, a Catholic, there debating. And so I loved, the little Catholic flair that was in there. And so I was very happy with that. And I think it's great, like a show of unity. And especially, look, Pine Creek says this. It's so interesting to me that you believe in God for quite different reasons than Maverick or Apologetics Squared or Otangelo. Not sure about Gordon. Do you guys think that's true? And then, what are the unifying things? Because I know this is one of the things Pine Creek picks on a lot, is like, hey, you guys can't agree on anything. Like, you think
Mhm.
God, is this way. You think God is this way. You think God is this way. Do you guys is it possible for you to know the same God? How can this God be so different in all of your minds and yet be the same God? So, like, are your reasons for believing different than mine? And are your ways of thinking about God so different that, what are your thoughts?
Well, clearly, I'm in this for the money, guys. I mean, I'm a pastor, right? My
Yeah,
goal is to
it's
start a
all about
mega church.
all about the greens.
Yeah, we're all grifters here. I was actually accused of being a grifter, even though financially speaking, this project of mine is in the red. Nah, pun intended.
Yeah, mine
Um,
too.
Well, here's an interesting thought. This comes from I think it was on the Analytic Christian. Like, do Muslims and Christians worship the same God? Thinking about, well, do we all worship the same God, even though we have different theologies? And a thought experiment. Like, for example, we're gonna go do something obviously fictional, Santa Claus, and it's like, okay, Santa Claus. If you believed that Santa Claus existed, but then your information was updated, and it's like, well, actually, his name's Saint Nicholas. He was a historical figure who had no magical powers and did not live in the North Pole and all that stuff. Would you believe, oh, Santa Claus is much different than I thought he was? Or would you believe, no, the thing I thought existed doesn't actually exist? And it seems that the reaction that most of us would have if we were in that kind of scenario is not, oh, St. Nicholas is much different than I thought he was. We would think, oh, Santa Claus doesn't exist. So then we could apply this to our conceptions of God. If I learned that all of, say, Rebecca's theology was right and mine was wrong, would I say, oh, God was much different than I thought he was? Or would I say, God, oh, the thing I thought was God doesn't exist? And for Rebecca's theology, I think, I would say, oh, God is much different than I thought he was. For Trent Horn's view of God, it's a lot closer to, but I still think it would be, oh, God is a lot different than I thought he was. I don't think I would, if I learned that my theology was wrong, these things, I don't think I would say, oh, God doesn't exist. Now, if I learned Graham Oppy was right, and the necessary being was this initial state of the universe with no emotions or anything, then I would say, oh, the thing I thought was God doesn't exist. I wouldn't say God is very different than I thought he was.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
so- Yeah, I kind of come at this from a different angle. There's a great tool called the Wesleyan Quadrilateral, which basically it's like a theological analytical tool. So it's 4 things: scripture, tradition, reason, and experience. And the idea there is you take any proposition, any claim that's being made about God or any theological type of statement, you put it in that box of scripture, tradition, reason, and experience, and you analyze it in your own context, and with a community of believers, and so forth. And the idea there is we can't really come to one unifying consensus as to which one of those 4 things has priority, or because they all inform our faith. Some people experience God differently. Some people read scripture differently. Some people put more emphasis on philosophical arguments. They reason themselves to God, and for them that tight intellectual kind of faith is what keeps them going. And then there's the tradition itself. Some people are this might be said more of Catholics or Pentecostals. For them, participating in church life is what it is to be a Christian. And so I think that there's, to be technical and complicated by way of an answer, I think that those 4 pieces do actually unify us together as believers, because we're all referring to the same object, which is God. And we're all trying to walk with one person who is Jesus. And we're all trying to feel out the presence, which is the Holy Spirit.
Amen. I agree with that. And I think like this is where is it? I think it was Matthew put up here. It's a little bit back in the chat. But basically his question was like, how many things would have to be wrong? Oh, how many things would have to be shown wrong in the Bible for you to disbelieve? Well, yeah, and like I'll say this is kind of not answering that. It's like more of going back to the other thing about how we have all, different ideas and different ways of coming to faith. I agree with like the things that you guys said. And I just want to add to that like, general revelation that God has given us is powerful. And like people can have the same concept of a creator and be wrong about a lot of things. And in fact, I wrote a book about this, guys, promoting my book here, Bridges of Love and Understanding. This is about my experience with Muslims. And I do believe that Muslims are worshiping the creator God. And, they have some, misinformation, but like you can, that doesn't mean that they're not mistaken about, some things, but like the general revelation that God has given us through the creation is powerful, and people can know their creator and worship their creator. And then within Christianity, people can know Jesus and worship Jesus and be wrong about a lot of things about him. And so none of us has perfect information about him.
My theology is all perfect, just so you know.
Yeah. So like if God waited to relate to people until they had perfect information about him, the universe would be a lonely place. Like God wouldn't be, relating to anyone because none of us have a perfect conception of who God is. But the more that we seek him, the more that we can have a conception of who he is in the midst of still being wrong about some stuff. So like, I'm totally happy with like all you guys have expressed some very different opinions about things and about like, your understanding of how all this stuff works and in your philosophy and Molinism and all this stuff. I don't care. Like, to me, I know that you know Jesus. I know you know the same Jesus that I know. And, one day we'll all see clearly and know who was right. And you'll find out I was right. Just kidding.
Just to clarify here, Rebecca, so you think that the Muslim which was deceived through the Muslim religion could eventually still be saved?
Well, I'm not in my statement about Muslims. I'm not in a position to say who's going to be saved. I'm not making a statement about that. What I'm making a statement about is that they can know the same God I know, even if they haven't read the Bible or even if they have a different conception of who Jesus Christ is. And sometimes we have the equation reversed, I think. Sometimes we Christians will start with the idea that, hey, if you don't know Jesus Christ as Lord, then you don't know the true God, right? But I think that that's actually backwards, that we should say, if someone knows God, then they do know Jesus Christ. They may not realize that's who they're communicating with, but if they're communicating with the creator God, they are communicating with Jesus Christ. And it may take them a while to figure out that that's who it is that they're talking to. But like that, God doesn't, when we're like approaching Muslims, they're not like starting with no information about God. They're not starting, God cares when people are getting on their knees 5 times a day and saying, Lord, creator of the universe, you're great. And like, that is meaningful if they're doing it with a sincere heart. And in my experience, my Muslim friends are doing that.
Yes, but you can imagine someone which does that and which belongs to ISIS, and then the next day goes and beheats a Christian because he is a Christian.
That's probably not the type of Muslim she was thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not referring to those who have gone to the extreme in the same way that, there's some people who call themselves Christians, but who are not espousing, the things that Christians do, like love and grace and the peace of God. So, like, I'm talking about Muslims who are exhibiting like the fruit that comes with knowing God.
You see, for example, today, a woman from Egypt, she contacted me on Facebook through Messenger, and she was a devout Christian, and then she started to do her investigation, and then she didn't find early manuscripts of the New Testament, and then she thinks now that the New Testament is all distorted and not true, and that Christ didn't die on the cross, and she is trying to convert me to Islam.
Okay, she's mistaken.
I agree.
What did I miss? Sorry, I had to go.
You missed
that's
everything,
okay.
Rob.
Actually, I kind of took us off topic. Sorry. But
Well, Rob, we had an important question actually that only you could answer with your expertise.
Sure.
What were you eating before?
Ah,
Like a sandwich?
no. I was having some Mediterranean bread.
Oh, some lavash.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just
And
want to
I got
clarify.
distracted. So,
So yeah, go ahead, Rob.
We should move
No.
on.
okay, let's move on. Yeah, I'm sorry. I took us off topic and I didn't even answer the guy's question. He said, how many things in the Bible would have to be wrong? I really don't know how to answer that question.
867.
Yeah.
You need
No,
more
so
faith.
Well, I think that
868.
question assumes that the Bible is making scientifically falsifiable claims, and
Yeah, I would like to just clarify
sorry.
here. I think this is important. I think that there are certain things which we cannot simply open up. And if Jesus said, "I am the truth, the way, and life. Nobody comes to the Father than through me." And if a Muslim rejects Christ and doesn't even believe in him as the Savior and the Messiah, and that he didn't even die on the cross for our sins, I cannot imagine that that person, even deceived by the Muslim religion, can be saved.
Oh, Tangelo, can I send you my book?
Sure.
I mean, at least hear the perspective I'm coming from in more than a way than can be talked about here.
No,
Sure.
I'll email you separately about that.
Okay.
But I would love to send it to you. And then, I mean, maybe it'll change your mind, maybe it won't. But let's get back on conference topic.
Oh, okay. I was going to actually quickly
you
answer.
want to add something?
Yeah.
Okay,
How
go
many
ahead.
things would have to be wrong in the Bible before it caused a problem or something?
Yeah.
Basically, you could think of like all the big players on the theories of how inerrancy works. Like inerrancy isn't like this monolithic doctrine. There are
Right.
different views of how inerrancy works, and some are less plausible and some are more plausible. And if there are errors that make me need to throw out certain views of inerrancy, and I'm left with only implausible theories, that will decrease my credence in the Christian religion. But if there are few enough errors that I can have nifty or like better doctrines of inerrancy, then that's going to be, I'm going to have a higher credence in Christianity. That's the way I view it.
Cool. Maverick Christian, do you want to say something about that?
Oh yeah. So I think like it isn't the number that's important; it's the type of beliefs that would be rejected. Suppose, for example, that Jesus is the Son of God. He sacrificed himself for humanity, died for our sins, and it's through him that we gather eternal life. Now, even if every other part of the Bible is false, that key, died for our sins, resurrected, and so forth, that would still make Christianity true. I think in the ordinary sense of the term.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll throw in one there, a legitimate one. The head covering issue. It's Greco-Roman medical science that Paul's utilizing. Now, I'm sort of being tongue-in-cheek here, but there is obviously a more transcendent truth behind Paul's message there. But he's utilizing the outdated understanding of how. What's the function of a woman's hair? Why did that culture do this thing called head covering? What was the logic and purpose behind that? And it's all to do with really weird medical stuff. And Paul didn't see it wrong to utilize it to make a theological argument. So how would you deal with that?
Okay, so the question there would be, we're hypothetically speaking, Paul is wrong. So
He's wrong medically, though. Yeah.
yeah. So
Because,
I think this is a case where we can just see in Scripture who's doing the talking, and Paul is not infallible. Paul is not perfect. In my Bible, his words don't show up in red. And so that's just one of those cases where I think it's you can, and he's not clearly presenting the gospel in that passage either. He's not really articulating
by the way,
it.
your answer is very good. I like it.
Yeah.
I can give my 2 cents. I'm going to be simplifying it. Let's say Paul says women should wear head coverings, and the reason he does this is for a false medical fact. So if I have a view of inerrancy that says every proposition in the Bible is true and was written down for true reasons, well, then I'd have to give up that version of inerrancy. Now, you could even maintain a weaker version of inerrancy, though. That still seems quite plausible. Like every proposition in the Bible is true. Now, that is consistent with somebody writing a true proposition for false reasons.
Kind of like it's inerrant in the sense that he's faithfully transmitting the cultural understanding of head covering.
Mm-hmm. And
yeah,
although that would commit me to I'm boiling it down. So maybe women should be wearing head coverings, but the reason that Paul gave for that that he was acting on when he gave that command was wrong. But God was guiding the inspiration, so that's a correct conclusion. Now that's oversimplification, and I don't have the belief that women should wear head coverings in church. I'm fairly agnostic about all that. Yeah.
That's the thing. Do you guys even know about that context about the head?
Let's not go there because that's completely off topic.
Right.
I don't want to go down
to talk about.
Now let's talk about my socks.
We're living in our magical world of this CC conference.
The CCV1 conference was bringing together all these people who love to talk about these things.
I wish I could talk about head covering at the CC conference. That would make capturing Christianity worthwhile.
So what do you guys think about, there's a couple of the talks that we haven't mentioned, so I just want to see if anybody has anything to say about them. We haven't said anything about Liz Jackson's talk, about Lee Strobel's talk, or Braxton Hunter.
Liz's was interesting, but I feel like, in my personal opinion, it's she spent too much time on something that I could get fairly easily. That I guess that's not actually that much of a criticism, because it is literally her whole point. It's that the problem of evil makes it so we should prefer that theism is true. But I don't know. I found that fairly self-evident.
Well,
it's almost like her whole talk was on something self-evident. It's like we should pragmatically prefer God to exist. It's well, duh.
Well, I really loved how she broke down the problem of evil. I really loved and the different theodicies. I thought she did an excellent job of, explaining that very well. And also what I loved about her talk is that she really shared her heart about how she really wrestles with the problem of evil and the problem of divine hiddenness. So I thought, it was just excellent, and that she was so candid about her own struggle with that, and that, just the way that she laid out the problem of evil. So, and the different resolutions to it. So, yeah.
I kind of think of it. She did raise one good point about how it could, a pragmatic reason could actually make it rational to believe in God.
That's very interesting.
And I think like the analogy she used for how it's possible for two different people would be like on a jury where where two people in the jury could be reasonable and be rational and yet disagree about sort of where the evidence points. And if you're on that line where both A and not A are both rational, well, then why not choose the one that's more pragmatic? It's the old Pascal's wager sort of thing, type of reasoning.
Cool. Okay, what about Braxton Hunter's talk?
I think he provided a great resource, I guess, just a what do you call it? A mnemonic device to kind
acrostic.
Acrostic. To just recall apologetics arguments, use them in a conversation is a good kind of process. And I don't have my notebook, so we're gonna have to go over the COREFACTS's on our own.
Yeah.
I have it here.
All right.
Yeah, so it was cause. So it's core facts. It kind of made me wonder, like, how much time did he spend trying to make an acrostic out of this stuff? But C was cause, KCA, the Kalam cosmological argument. O is for order, like fine tuning. R is for rules, like moral rules. E is for experience, experiencing God. F is for fatal. G for Jesus's wounds were fatal. A is appeased. People had experience that appeared. Man, my writing could be better. People had experiences that they interpreted as appearances of Jesus. C is commitment. They're willing to die for their beliefs. T is testimony. Testimony. Boy, whose idea was this to make this dark red foreboding environment? This is crazy.
Okay.
S is for salvation. We should hear and believe what Jesus has to say. What was that, Otangelo?
Yeah, I'm reading. Thank you, Rebecca, for having me on your stream.
Oh, thank you, Otangelo. Thanks for being here.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Okay, back to our core facts. What did you guys think about that? The talk, and was it helpful? And did anybody go to his breakout session?
I actually didn't go to his breakout, but I thought that the core facts kind of what it does is it gives us a process, a way of organizing a conversation, perhaps, in terms of figuring out where we can go next. The sort of things that we need to talk about that might be interesting to the person we're talking to.
Cool. Okay, what about Lee Strobel's talk?
I was expecting a thicker Chicago accent. No.
I mean, it seemed kind of out of place at the Capturing Christianity conference, but it's awesome that, that there was such a big name there. And I loved hearing the miracle stories.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it was just very powerful just in terms of that audio thing that he played of the guy regaining normal function of his voice. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, he's I mean, that was associated with his book, The Case for Miracles, and he's sort of doing a lot of publicity for that right now. And I mean, I overheard Braxton talking, saying like he had seen that presentation before, and but it always like hits him differently every time he sees it.
It didn't seem that out of place, because this would be evidence for miracles, which of course would be related to apologetics.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I guess I haven't like really, I guess that's true. It just seemed like usually when I think of capturing Christianity, I think of more like philosophy and things like that. So maybe that's why it seemed out of place. But I mean, I personally enjoyed it very much. And so what about you, Apologetics Squared? What did you think about that?
I mean, I do get the kind of out of placeness of it. It's like, I suppose, like, capturing Christianity is, this conference was very interesting because it's like, you have like almost two different kinds of apologists. There's like the one level where you have like the experts creating like academic content, and then you have the popularizers who are trying to like use that expert content and in the more general public discussion area. But with the capturing Christianity kind of like the audience at that conference, they were at a, like, at least everyone I talked to was like at a level where they would want to jump just directly to the expert level. They don't really need that popularizer kind of in between, which, yeah, that's not to say anything against anybody. So it just created an interesting dynamic.
Well, I mean, I'm the type that needs the popularizer, because a lot of that stuff is not really like, I'm not that much into philosophy. And so like Lee Strobel's talk was really fun and like kind of a mental break from like the concentration that I had to put forth for the other talks.
Okay. And it is like, it's just interesting because I'm like imagining like most like at least everybody who I had talked to, like the kind of stuff they would be thinking during this is like the epistemology of when testimony is like sufficient to, like how much should this the testimony of these individuals raise your credence in these propositions given the regularity of the laws of nature as your background information, stuff like that.
Yeah, because I think that there is one, I mean, that whole presentation, it could have gone that route of just talking about the value of testimony and all that kind of stuff. But I forget who said this, and maybe it'd probably be best if they remained anonymous. I was talking with someone who was at the conference, and they brought up the fact that, you know, even though Lee Strobel's his case has some very good anecdotal evidence, there's a lot of stuff that's missing that perhaps a skeptic would want to see, like doctors' reports, all that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, I mean, you're getting into some HIPAA stuff, and so that's kind of like a tension I have with using miracles as part of my apologetics, is because the amount of information that I could provide, we can't really access because of privacy and all that kind of stuff. And so at some level, we do have to take people at their word, and we just have to accept that their personal experience going through a process in which they believed a miracle happened was genuine. And, you know, again, we're getting into that, the epistemology pieces of asking ourselves, well, does that make sense with our background knowledge or not? And so that's just something that's like a personal, I guess, frustration I have with using miracles and apologetics, contemporary miracles, that is.
Yeah, it is, you know, it is difficult. I do know of one organization that is trying to document miracles and asking, like, when people get healed, they're asking them, hey, if you are willing, can you submit medical records and stuff like that? But I heard about that a few years ago, and I haven't checked back with them. So I would like to check back and see if they've kind of built their database.
Yeah, and I know like the Catholic Church, I mean, they have like a whole team that does miracle investigations and stuff, and so there is that angle that we can take. But again, the Catholic Church, they invest a lot of resources whenever they investigate a miracle, and typically it might not be something that a skeptic would be persuaded by, even if they agreed that there was no natural explanation for what happened. So that's
You know what? I've got, look, and I'm happy to say this while Pine Creek is watching, because, I was on another channel and had a bunch of people grilling me about miracles I've seen. And, I started talking about a miracle and they were like, well, then you're saying he was on drugs, so the medication actually helped him. And I was like, no, but the medication is not known to be able to cure that disease. Like, the medication is known to have a limit. It doesn't cure, it only manages symptoms. But it was more plausible to them to attribute a divine attribute, a miraculous attribute to the drug than it was to just say, okay, this is unexplainable except for, the power of God or something like that. So you get in a situation where it doesn't matter what, people are not going to believe, no matter what. And I've seen this over and over again. I've seen atheists get healed of stuff and still not believe. So for me, like, I never use miracles to try to help people believe in God, because I know it's not that is not usually the way. Like, God actually has to really touch people, and they have to have an open heart. And so, but I mean, I don't know, that's my experience.
Hey, Rebecca, I'm gonna head out soon, so God bless you.
Okay,
Sorry,
thanks. Rob, do you want to share any final thoughts before you go?
I haven't watched the conference. I do pray, though, that whatever Cameron has done has at least benefited. Like, ultimately I pray God has worked through whatever means. I mean, I'm gonna be blunt. I personally don't find anything of value in the conference, because I don't know. I just can't relate with that type of apologetic approach. But that I don't want that to then deter from the possibility that it can be helpful to someone. So,
well, I think you would have loved it, Rob. It was really fun, and your buddy Luke Barnes spoke, and I think you would have liked that.
If Luke was there, then that must have been the highlight.
Well, there were a lot of highlights, and so I challenge you to rethink your position on that. Watch the debate, and because that is available online.
Luke does, if Luke speaks, he does a fantastic job. He's an Australian astrophysicist, and Rebecca, I recommend you check out Luke Barnes.
Well, you know what, Robert? I bought his book while I was there, and I'm gonna read it. So
excellent.
Yeah. Okay.
You love it. It's a very good book.
Okay. Thanks, Rob.
God bless you.
Bye. God bless you.
See you guys.
Bye. Enjoy your Mediterranean bread.
Oh, I've already eaten a nice dose of it. I might eat again.
Well, Rebecca, let me throw a Bible verse at you. This is Luke 16:31. He said to them, if they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead.
Exactly. People, and that's what the thing is. Jesus was going around doing tons of miracles, right? But then, like, the people who did not believe in him said, "Show us a sign to see that to show us that you really have the authority to, teach these things and do these things. Show us a sign. Where have you been, guys?" Like, he's showing all kinds of signs, but Jesus's response was, "A wicked generation asks for a sign. No sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah." Jonah. So, like, Jesus, it's not like he was withholding miracles. He was doing tons of them. But, like, people were not, the people who just weren't going to believe, would not believe even with the miracles that Jesus was doing.
One thing I should point out is that we're finally squared now.
No, I'm squared.
No. Yeah. So, okay. What about, did you guys have was there anything that I missed that we didn't talk about?
I think that's about it.
One thing I want to mention, I said, like, Liz Jackson spent a lot of time talking about how the problem of evil gives us reason why we should favor theism, like we should want theism to be true. But that's nothing. I hope I'm not coming across as critical here. I love their presentations. But Josh Rasmussen, in his like breakout session, he spent like the most controversial premise of his argument that he was giving, that a blue piece of Lego cannot think about you. That was his most controversial premise. So he spent the most time arguing that blue Lego cannot think.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That was
interesting.
I don't know. I remember reading about super intelligent shades of blue.
Yes. Oh, I love that book. That's an interesting book.
It's a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference.
Well, I will just say a few more things that I loved about the conference. You know what? I loved meeting Brittany Bertuzzi. She was just so amazing, and I just thought, wow, she's done so much work for this, and I was really blessed by her. And I just loved the people that I met. I met just really cool people. Audrey Bartosh, I think she's in the Bereans group a lot, but I just loved meeting her. I loved meeting a guy named Nathaniel. I loved there were some great people there. So I had a lot of fun. And one of the things that was great for me, Gordon, when I put on our group, "Hey, who wants to go eat at Chewy's?" And like almost nobody responded. So me and Gordon thought it was going to be like us and like two other people. And then we show up at Chewy's and there's like a giant table full of people. And it was fun.
It was nice meeting Apologetics Squared. I had no idea he actually looked like a square in real life.
Yeah, most people are surprised that I'm actually a two-dimensional stick man.
Digital physics confirmed.
Mm-hmm.
There's a picture online for anybody curious to confirm my observation.
Yeah. So anyway, it stimulated a lot of talks. My niece and my son came to the conference. My sister came, and like before and after and during the dinner break, I mean, they were just talking nonstop. We were just talking nonstop. So like the talks that they listened to like generated hours of conversation. And for me, that was really exciting because, sometimes I don't feel like I have that much in common with my son, but we really bonded over this conference. So it was great.
Yeah, just the fellowship in general was, I think, the big highlight. Lots of Tex-Mex food, lots of margaritas. Yeah,
It It was the only context I've ever been in where, like, during a presentation, someone can whisper phenomenological conservatism, and everybody within earshot starts snickering. Like, yeah, that's a kind of a rare circumstance.
Yeah. Apologetics squared. What's gonna be going on in your channel?
Well, currently I have a bunch of atheists who made like response videos. Like one of them being Pine Creek. He made a video on my video of the horrific thesis. So I know and I am planning on responding to that. Also, Godless Engineer and Prophet of Zod, and this smaller channel, Physically Debunked. He made like probably my favorite response video out of all of them on my argument from, or not my argument, Christopher Mettenzel's argument from Sets. So it's like all these response videos I need to make. And also in like the past, I don't know, 3 weeks that I haven't been posting, I've come up with a lot of other cool ideas for arguments and stuff. So I have a lot of stuff I want to do and not a lot of time.
Yeah, I got a paper to work on. That's sort of, a busted arm kind of slowed me down too. It's getting better though. I can move it a lot more than I used to.
I still think I'd win in arm wrestling. No, I mean specifically the broken one. I don't know about the other arm.
Yeah, I don't think I have to wait a while before I do push-ups with it. I can do push-ups with one hand.
Well, Maverick Christian has put out a lot of great stuff, and I'm just wondering, what is your area that you're focusing on for your degree?
Philosophy.
I mean, like in anything in particular, like a particular direction?
Vague things. Wonderfully vague thing. No, okay. So of course, one of my interests, of course, is philosophy of religion.
Yeah.
I'll probably sometime this year. I'll probably get that paper submitted for publication. The one I did on my most recent debate about the evolutionary argument against naturalism. And so my senior thesis, I think it might be a version of kind of the, like if naturalism is true, then we don't have moral knowledge, a kind of moral epistemological claim, which of course could be used as a, an argument for theism. But as Hilary Putnam once said, one philosopher is modus ponens, another's modus tollens, or is it the other way around? Apologetics squared. Do you remember which order that came in?
Actually, it's both. You can use it either way depending on the context.
Well, I know, but the original quote from Hilary Putnam.
Oh, no, I don't.
Yeah, I'll have to look at. For some reason, I keep forgetting the order.
Gordon, what do you have going on for projects now?
Well, I do have my blog. I'm on medium.com, and I just released an article last week called The Tragedy of Atheist Polemic. Check it out.
Cool. Do you want to put the link in the comments or something?
Yeah, I'll drop it in.
Okay. Yeah. Well, this has been a fun discussion, guys. Thank you so much. And I don't know if the Bertuzzis will watch this, but I just want to thank you guys for your work, for putting together this conference. We're looking forward to next year, and I hope that this inspires some jealousy for those who didn't make it to try to make it to the next one. And I enjoyed it so much more than I thought I was going to. Like, I really thought, why am I even going to this? I don't know anything about philosophy. I'm an evangelist, not really an apologist, but I just loved it so much. I love being around all these people, all these ideas, and just people who are thinking seriously about the faith, and so it was great.
Yeah, I think it was a great conference. I can't wait for next year. I'm kind of worried that, maybe in a few years, if there's like a huge crowd or whatever, the magic might be gone, and we might lose that connection that made this first one so special. But that's neither here nor there. But thanks for hosting this, Rebecca. Good to see you again, and good to see you all too, Wade and Apologetics Squared. So
Yeah, you too, guys. And we'll just we'll just say close with, by the way, God exists.
God exists.